Years rolled by, and Emily grew into a bright, confident teenager. Her days of sitting in a wheelchair felt like a distant memory now, replaced by laughter-filled afternoons spent running through fields or dancing at school events. She had become the heart of Hope Haven, a constant presence always ready to lend a hand. Whether it was helping new patients adjust to therapy routines or cheering on kids taking their first steps, her energy lit up the entire center. People often remarked how much she reminded them of Karan, full of determination, kindness, and an unshakable belief that anything was possible. Karan himself was no longer the scruffy boy who once begged on street corners. Now, in his early 20s, he stood tall and poised, wearing the white coat of a medical student with pride. He had graduated top of his class, earning scholarships and accolades along the way. But despite his growing reputation, he remained grounded, returning to Hope Haven whenever he could. For him, the center wasn't just where his journey began. It was home. It was here that he found purpose, mentors, and a family who believed in him when the world didn't. Richard watched both Emily and Karen grow with a mix of pride and wonder. He often thought about how different life might have been if he hadn't taken a chance on that rainy evening years ago. Back then, he was a man weighed down by grief and frustration, searching for answers in all the wrong places. Today, he was someone reborn. Someone who understood that true wealth lay not in possessions but in connections, compassion, and the ability to make a difference. One crisp winter morning, Hope Haven buzzed with excitement. The center was hosting its annual celebration, marking another year of healing and hope. Families gathered under colorful tents set up in the courtyard, sharing meals and stories. Children played tag, their giggles echoing through the air. Volunteers bustled around, handing out blankets and hot drinks to keep everyone warm. At the center of it all stood Richard, Emily, Dr. Aaron, and Karen, surrounded by people whose lives they had touched. Emily stepped onto a small stage decorated with flowers and ribbons, clutching a microphone nervously. She had insisted on giving a speech, wanting to express her gratitude to everyone who had supported her over the years. As she looked out at the sea of faces, some smiling, some tearful, she took a deep breath and began. "When I was little," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat, "I used to dream of walking again. I would draw pictures of myself running, climbing trees, and playing games with my friends. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing those dreams could come true. Then one day, a boy told me I could walk again, not because he had magic, but because he believed in me." She paused, glancing toward Karan, who grinned proudly from the crowd. "That boy changed everything. And so did this place. Hope Haven isn't just a building. It's a family. A family that taught me courage, patience, and the power of never giving up. Because of them, I'm standing here today, not just as someone who walks again, but as someone who believes in miracles." The audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. Emily stepped down from the stage, hugging her father tightly, as she returned to her seat. Richard kissed her forehead, whispering, "You've grown into such an amazing young woman." Later that afternoon, Richard pulled Karan aside for a quiet conversation. They walked together toward the edge of the property, where a sapling had recently been planted, a symbol of growth and renewal. "I've been thinking," Richard said, his tone thoughtful. "Hope Haven has done wonders here, but there are still so many places that need help. Villages without clinics, families without access to care. You talked about opening centers across the country. What if we started making that dream a reality?" Karen's eyes widened with surprise. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Dead serious," Richard replied, with a smile. "You've proven yourself more than capable. With your knowledge, passion, and leadership, we can expand Hope Haven's reach. Together." For a moment, Karen simply stared at the ground, overwhelmed by the weight of what Richard was offering. Then, lifting his gaze, he nodded firmly. "Let's do it," he said, "but let's do it right. One step at a time." Over the next few years, Hope Haven became a movement rather than just a single facility. Smaller centers sprouted in remote villages, staffed by volunteers trained at the original location. Mobile clinics traveled to areas too far for patients to visit regularly, bringing care directly to their doorsteps. Karan led the expansion efforts, traveling extensively while finishing his medical degree. Along the way, he inspired countless others to join the cause, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. Dr. Aaron, though older now, continued mentoring young healers at Hope Haven. His hands may have trembled slightly as he applied herbal pastes or adjusted pressure points, but his mind remained sharp, his wisdom timeless. He often joked that he wouldn't retire until every corner of the country had a Hope Haven of its own. Though Richard knew this was impossible, he admired the old man's relentless optimism. As for Richard, he found fulfillment in ways he never imagined. Selling off parts of his corporate empire allowed him to focus entirely on philanthropy, pouring resources into education, healthcare, and community development projects. He became known not as a billionaire businessman but as a champion for the underserved, a man who chose to use his privilege to uplift others. One sunny spring morning, Emily stood outside the gates of Hope Haven, watching a group of children chase each other across the courtyard. She turned to Richard, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think Mom would be happy seeing us like this?" she asked softly. Richard smiled, placing an arm around her shoulders. "She'd be proud," he said. "Not just of you, but of all of us. We've built something bigger than ourselves, a legacy of hope, love, and resilience." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "And it's not ending here, is it? This is just the beginning." "That's right," Richard replied. "It's just the beginning." As they stood side by side, gazing at the bustling center filled with laughter, learning, and healing, they knew the journey was far from over. Hope Haven had ignited a chain reaction of positivity, inspiring countless others to dream bigger, reach further, and believe harder. It was proof that even in the darkest times, a single act of faith, a beggar boy's bold declaration, could set off a ripple effect of transformation, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. And so, amidst the hum of activity and the warmth of shared dreams, the story of Hope Haven lived on. One step, one heartbeat, one miracle at a time. Years passed, and Hope Haven grew into more than just a rehabilitation center. It became a symbol of resilience, unity, and the power of human connection. What had started as a humble clinic in an abandoned warehouse was now a sprawling facility that served hundreds of patients every week. Families traveled from neighboring towns and even distant cities to seek treatment, drawn by stories of recovery and transformation. The once desolate slum around it transformed too, with streets cleaner, shops bustling, and children playing freely under watchful eyes. Richard's life changed in ways he never imagined. Gone were the days when his calendar overflowed with board, meetings, and business deals. Now his mornings began with visits to Hope Haven, where he greeted patients, helped organize supplies, or simply sat with Dr. Aaron over cups of steaming chai, discussing new ideas for improving treatments. He found joy in these small moments that reminded him how much richer life felt when shared with others. Emily blossomed into a confident young girl. She walked without assistance, ran through fields during school picnics, and even joined her classmates in dance performances. Her sketches no longer depicted girls running alone. Instead, they showed entire communities holding hands, celebrating, together. One day, while helping Karen sort herbs in the storage room, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think I'll ever be able to help people like you helped me?" she asked. Karen smiled warmly, setting down the jar he was holding. "Of course," he said. "You already are. Every time someone hears your story, they believe a little harder, hope a little stronger. That's how change happens. Not all at once, but step by step." Her words stayed with Richard long after she left to play outside. It struck him then. Emily wasn't just walking again. She was learning to give back, to inspire others the way she had been inspired. And in doing so, she carried forward the spirit of Hope Haven. Karan, meanwhile, thrived in boarding school. Though he missed the familiar chaos of the slums and the warmth of Dr. Aaron's guidance, he embraced his studies with fierce determination. His teachers marveled at his focus, noting how quickly he grasped complex concepts despite coming from such humble beginnings. On weekends, he returned to Hope Haven, eager to share what he'd learned. Whether it was explaining muscle anatomy to patients or teaching volunteers basic first aid, Karan poured his heart into everything he did. One Friday evening, as he unpacked his bag after returning from school, Dr. Aaron called him aside. The old man looked tired but happy, his eyes twinkling with pride. "You've come so far, my boy," Dr. Aaron said softly. "But tell me, what do you dream of now? Where does this path lead you?" Karan paused, considering the question carefully. Then, with quiet conviction, he replied, "I want to open centers like Hope Haven everywhere. In villages and cities, wherever people need them. I want everyone to have access to care, no matter who they are or where they come from." Dr. Arun nodded approvingly. "That's a noble dream. But remember, dreams require patience. You've already lit a fire. Let it spread slowly, steadily." Richard overheard their conversation and stepped closer, placing a hand on Karen's shoulder. "You won't walk this road alone," he said firmly. "I promised to support you, and I meant it. Whatever resources you need, whatever challenges arise, we'll face them together." Karan looked between the two men, gratitude swelling in his chest. For years he had believed kindness came only from strangers passing by. Now, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him, he understood that true strength lay not in standing alone, but in lifting others up alongside you. As Hope Haven continued to thrive, its impact rippled outward, touching lives far beyond the immediate community. Journalists wrote articles about the center, highlighting its unique blend of traditional medicine and modern techniques. Doctors from prestigious hospitals visited to observe treatments, leaving inspired to incorporate similar practices into their own work. Even government officials took notice, pledging funds to replicate the model in underserved areas across the country. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within those who worked and volunteered at Hope Haven. Nurses who had grown jaded from years of working in overcrowded hospitals rediscovered their passion for healing. Teenagers who spent weekends assisting patients realized they wanted careers in healthcare. Mothers who brought their children for treatment stayed behind to learn skills like massage therapy or herbal preparation, empowering themselves financially while giving back to the community. One particularly memorable moment came when a young woman named Anjali approached Richard during a celebration marking Hope Haven's 5th anniversary. She had arrived at the center years ago, barely able to lift her arms after a severe accident. Now she stood tall, holding a diploma in physiotherapy. "I owe everything to this place," she said tearfully. "Not just because I recovered, but because it taught me that I could make a difference too. Today I'm proud to say I'm part of the team." Richard hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. "This is why we built Hope Haven," he whispered. "So people like you can rise, heal, and carry the torch." Despite the successes, there were still struggles. Funding remained a constant challenge, especially as the center expanded its services to include mental health counseling, nutritional guidance, and vocational training. Supplies occasionally ran low, forcing Richard to dip into his personal savings. Yet every obstacle seemed manageable because of the unwavering support from the community. Local businesses donated food and materials, schools organized fundraisers, and volunteers worked tirelessly to keep operations running smoothly. Through it all, Richard reflected on how much he had gained by giving. Wealth, he realized, wasn't measured in bank balances but in relationships, purpose, and the ability to create lasting change. Watching Emily laugh with other children, seeing Karen grow into a leader, and witnessing countless families find hope renewed, these were treasures money couldn't buy. One quiet evening, as Richard sat on a bench outside Hope Haven, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, he felt a deep sense of peace. Emily joined him, settling beside him with a contented sigh. "Daddy," she said after a while, "do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Richard wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Memories of his late wife flooded his mind, her laughter, her kindness, her love for Emily. "She'd be more than proud," he said softly. "She'd be amazed. We've built something beautiful together, sweetheart. Something she always dreamed of." Tears glistened in Emily's eyes, but she smiled through them. "And we're not done yet, right?" "No," Richard replied, his voice steady with resolve. "We're just getting started." As darkness fell and stars began to twinkle above, father and daughter sat in silence, basking in the glow of what they had created, a legacy of hope, healing, and humanity. Little did they know, the seeds they planted would continue to grow, branching out into countless lives and inspiring generations to come. The day Emily took her first steps was a turning point, not just for her family, but for everyone connected to the makeshift clinic. News of her progress spread like wildfire through the slums. People who had once doubted the strange herbal treatments and unconventional exercises now came forward with renewed hope. Mothers carrying sick children on their backs lined up outside the warehouse before sunrise. Fathers brought elderly relatives hobbling on canes, desperate for relief from years of pain. Even teenagers with sports injuries shyly approached Karan, asking if he could help them too. Richard watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and pride. He had never imagined that his decision to trust a beggar boy would lead to this, a ripple effect of healing and transformation spreading far beyond Emily's recovery. But as the clinic grew busier, so did the challenges. Supplies ran low, space became cramped, and the constant influx of patients stretched Dr. Aaron and Karen thin. Despite Richard's financial support, the operation felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. One evening, after another long day at the clinic, Richard sat with Karen and Dr. Aaron in the dim light of a flickering bulb. The air smelled faintly of herbs and sweat, mingled with the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil seeping through cracks in the walls. Emily lay asleep nearby, curled up on a makeshift cot, her face peaceful after hours of physical therapy. "We need to expand," Richard said finally, breaking the silence. "This place is bursting at the seams. If we don't do something soon, we won't be able to handle the demand." Dr. Aaron nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. But expansion isn't just about money. It's about sustainability. We need trained hands, more people who understand these methods and can carry them forward." Karan leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "What if we turned this into a proper rehabilitation center? A place where anyone, rich or poor, could come for treatment? And what if I helped train others while I study medicine?" Richard smiled, seeing the spark of ambition in the boy's gaze. "That's exactly what we'll do," he said firmly. "But this time, let's do it right. No more abandoned warehouses. Let's build something permanent, something that will last for generations." Over the next few months, Richard poured his energy, and a significant portion of his fortune, into transforming the rundown warehouse into a state-of-the-art facility. He hired architects, engineers, and designers, ensuring every detail reflected both functionality and compassion. The new building, which they named Hope Haven, stood tall and welcoming, its walls painted in warm colors and adorned with murals, created by local artists. Inside, there were spacious treatment rooms equipped with modern tools alongside traditional remedies, a gym for physical therapy, and even classrooms where aspiring healers could learn from Dr. Aaron and other experts. But Richard didn't stop there. He reached out to medical professionals across the city, inviting them to volunteer their time and expertise. Many initially hesitated, skeptical of unorthodox methods involving herbs and acupuncture. However, when they saw the results firsthand, the smiles of recovering patients, the gratitude in their voices, they began to embrace the fusion of ancient wisdom and contemporary science. For Karan, life changed dramatically. Richard kept his promise and enrolled him in a prestigious boarding school, known for nurturing talent from underprivileged backgrounds. At first, Karan struggled to adapt, wearing uniforms instead of tattered clothes, sitting in classrooms filled With students who had grown up in luxury, it all felt alien to him. But he refused to give up. Every night after finishing his homework, he read books on anatomy and biology borrowed from the library. On weekends, he returned to Hope Haven, eager to assist Dr. Arun and check on Emily's progress. Emily, meanwhile, blossomed. With each passing week, she grew stronger, more confident. She no longer needed crutches to walk short distances, and her laughter echoed louder than ever before. One afternoon, as she played catch with some neighborhood kids outside the center, she turned to Richard with a grin. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed, running toward him without stumbling. "I'm doing it!" Richard caught her in his arms, holding her close as tears pricked his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered. "You're flying." As the months turned into a year, Hope Haven became a beacon of light in the community. Families traveled from distant villages to seek treatment, sharing stories of how the center had changed their lives. A farmer whose leg had been crushed in an accident walked again, allowing him to return to work and provide for his family. An elderly woman regained partial movement in her hands, enabling her to cook meals for her grandchildren. Even young athletes injured during games found solace and strength within its walls. Yet amidst the triumphs, there were moments of heartbreak too. Not every patient recovered fully. Not every story ended happily. There were days when Dr. Aaron sat quietly in his office, staring at old photographs of his younger self in a crisp white coat, wondering if he could have done more. Karan often stayed late into the night, poring over textbooks, determined to find answers for those who still suffered. Through it all, Richard remained steadfast. He realized that wealth wasn't just about accumulating riches, it was about creating opportunities, bridging gaps, and giving back to society. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, purposeful. His bond with Emily deepened, and together, they visited Hope Haven regularly, volunteering whenever possible. Emily loved helping Karan organize supplies or cheer on patients during therapy sessions. To her, the center wasn't just a place of healing, it was home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden rays over the bustling streets, Richard stood outside Hope Haven, watching families leave with smiles on their faces. Karen joined him, now taller and wearing the uniform of his boarding school proudly. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Karan asked, glancing up at Richard. "How could I forget?" Richard chuckled. "You were sitting on the curb covered in dirt, telling me you could make my daughter walk again. And here we are," Karan said softly, gesturing toward the glowing building behind them. "Look what happened because you chose to believe." Richard placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling a surge of gratitude. "No, Karen. Look what happened because you chose to dream. You reminded me that miracles aren't born out of privilege, they come from courage, kindness, and refusing to give up." For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood side by side, taking in the hum of activity around them, the laughter of children, the chatter of volunteers, the quiet determination of patients pushing themselves one step further. Little did they know, their journey was far from over. Hope Haven was just the beginning, a seed planted in fertile soil, destined to grow into something extraordinary. And as the stars blinked to life above them, Richard couldn't help but feel that the best chapters of their story were yet to be written. Richard's mind raced as he drove back to the slums that night. The image of the damaged clinic and Dr. Aaron's injured face haunted him. He had seen poverty before, glimpsed it from the tinted windows of his car or during charity events where he wrote checks without truly understanding the struggles of those on the receiving end. But this was different. This wasn't just about money. It was personal now. These were people who had given him hope when no one else could. And they needed protection. When he arrived at the warehouse, the scene was worse than he'd imagined. Broken glass littered the floor, medical supplies scattered everywhere, and a few chairs overturned like casualties of war. Dr. Aaron sat on a stool, wincing as Karen cleaned a cut on his forehead with a damp cloth. Despite the chaos around them, neither seemed defeated. Their eyes still carried determination, even if their bodies showed weariness. "What happened here?" Richard asked, his voice tight with anger. Karan looked up, guilt flashing across his face. "They came late last night," he said quietly. Said we owed them for using this space. When we told them we didn't have any money, they trashed everything. Dr. Aaron sighed deeply, leaning back against the wall. It's not the first time something like this has happened, he admitted, but usually we find a way to keep going. This time, his voice trailed off, and he glanced at Emily, who sat in her wheelchair nearby watching silently. This time I fear it might put your daughter in danger. Richard clenched his fists. Danger? After all these years of shielding Emily from pain, after finally finding a glimmer of hope, he wouldn't let anyone take it away. Not thugs, not fear, not anything. Listen to me, Richard said firmly, crouching down so he was eye level with both Karan and Dr. Aaron. You saved my daughter once by giving me hope. Now it's my turn to save you. We're not stopping this. Not now, not ever. The next morning, Richard went into action. For the first time in years, he used his wealth not to build empires but to protect lives. He hired private security guards to patrol the area around the clinic, ensuring that no gangsters dared return. Then he reached out to local authorities, pulling strings and calling in favors until promises were made to crack down on illegal activities in the neighborhood. It wasn't easy. There were threats, bribes offered behind closed doors, and whispers of retaliation. But Richard stood firm. If there was one thing he knew how to do, it was fight. Word spread quickly among the locals. People began referring to Richard not as the rich man, but as someone who cared enough to stand up for them. Mothers brought food to the clinic to thank him. Fathers offered to help repair the damage. Even the kids, barefoot and giggling, pitched in by sweeping the floors and picking up shards of glass. The sense of community grew stronger each day, fueled by a shared purpose, protecting the place that had become a beacon of healing for so many. Meanwhile, Emily's progress continued, though not without challenges. Some days, she struggled more than others, her muscles aching from the exercises or frustration bubbling over when she couldn't move the way she wanted to. But Karan never let her give up. He had a knack for knowing exactly what to say to lift her spirits. You know, he told her one afternoon while helping her stretch her legs, even the strongest trees start as tiny seeds. They grow slowly, bit by bit, until one day they're tall enough to touch the sky. That's what you're doing, Emily, growing stronger every single day. Emily smiled faintly, wiping sweat from her brow. Do you really think I'll walk again? I don't think, Karan replied with a grin. I know. Her faith in him was unshakable, and Richard couldn't help but marvel at the bond forming between his daughter and the boy. There was something pure about it, a connection born not out of privilege or obligation, but from mutual respect and trust. Watching them together reminded Richard of simpler times, before wealth and responsibility had hardened parts of him. As weeks turned into months, small victories started adding up. One morning during a session involving balance exercises, Emily managed to stand upright for a few seconds using parallel bars. Tears streamed down Richard's face as he watched her grip the bars tightly, her knuckles white with effort, but her expression triumphant. She did it, Karan exclaimed, clapping enthusiastically. See, sir, she's getting there. Dr. Aaron nodded approvingly, jotting notes in his worn-out notebook. Her body is responding well, he said. With consistent practice, she'll regain more control over her movements. But progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, too. Days when Emily felt too tired to try, or when the herbal paste caused mild irritation on her skin. During those moments, Richard found himself leaning heavily on Karan and Dr. Aaron for guidance. They reassured him, reminding him that recovery was a marathon, not a sprint. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Richard sat outside the clinic with Karan. The boy was quieter than usual, staring at the distant city skyline. What are you thinking about? Richard asked gently. Karan hesitated before answering. About dreams, he said softly. Mine is to build a center where everyone can get treatment, no matter how poor they are. A place where people don't have to choose between eating or seeing a doctor. Richard studied the boy's face, seeing beyond the dirt and tattered, clothes to the brilliance beneath. Here was someone who had nothing yet dreamed of changing the world. It humbled him. "I'll help you," Richard said suddenly, "if you promise me one thing." "What's that?" Karen asked, surprised. "That. You'll finish school and study medicine properly. You've got a gift, kid, don't waste it." For a moment, Karan didn't respond. Then tears welled up in his eyes and he nodded vigorously. "I will, sir, I swear." Back home, Richard noticed subtle changes in himself. He laughed more often, spent less time buried in work emails, and made an effort to connect with Emily, on a deeper level. They talked about her dreams, how she wanted to run through fields of wildflowers someday, climb trees, and dance under the stars. Each conversation filled him with renewed determination to see her dreams come true. At the same time, the clinic became more than just a place of healing. It became a symbol of resilience. Neighbors volunteered to repaint the walls, turning them into vibrant murals depicting scenes of hope and unity. Children played outside, their laughter echoing through the streets. For the first time in years, the slum felt alive, pulsating with energy and purpose. And then, one miraculous morning, it happened. As Emily held onto crutches for support, she took 3 shaky steps forward, all on her own. Time seemed to freeze. As Richard watched, tears streaming down his face. He rushed to her side, hugging her tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. "You did it, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You walked." Emily beamed, her eyes shining with joy. "We did it, Daddy, all of us." Standing nearby, Karen grinned proudly, while Dr. Aaron wiped a tear from his cheek. In that moment, none of them needed words to express what they felt. They had achieved something extraordinary together, something that transcended wealth, status, or background. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change countless lives, including their own. The next morning, Richard woke up earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much, his mind racing with doubts and questions. Was he making a fool of himself by even considering this? What would people think if they saw him, a billionaire, listening to some beggar boy's wild claims? But then he thought of Emily, her bright smile, her quiet resilience, and the way she refused to give up hope, even when everyone else had. If there was even a tiny chance, no matter how small, he owed it to her to try. He picked Emily up from her room. She was already dressed in her favorite pink dress, sitting patiently in her wheelchair as she always did. When Richard told her they were going to the park, her eyes lit up. "Are we meeting someone special?" she asked innocently, clutching her stuffed bunny close to her chest. "Maybe," Richard replied with a faint smile. He didn't want to get her hopes up too high, but he also couldn't lie to her. "We'll see." When they arrived at the park near the riverbank, the place was quiet except for the sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. The boy was there, just as he had promised, sitting on a bench with an elderly man beside him. The man looked frail, his hair gray and his hands wrinkled, but his eyes carried a warmth that made him seem wise beyond his years. As Richard pushed Emily's wheelchair closer, the boy stood up and greeted them with a respectful nod. "Good morning, sir," he said softly. Then turning to Emily, he smiled warmly. "And who might this be?" "This is my daughter, Emily," Richard said stiffly. He still wasn't sure what to make of all this, but he gestured toward the elderly man. "Who's this?" The old man stepped forward, bowing slightly. His voice was calm and steady, like the sound of a river flowing gently over stones. "My name is Dr. Aaron," he said. "I used to be a doctor back in my country, specializing in bones and muscles. Life took me down a different path, but I have continued helping those in need however I can." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You're saying you know something about treating paralysis?" Dr. Aaron nodded slowly. "Not in the way modern hospitals do, perhaps, but we've learned methods passed down through generations, herbal remedies, pressure points, exercises tailored to each person's condition. It's not magic, sir. Just knowledge combined with patience and care." The boy chimed in, his tone eager yet respectful. Dr. Aaron has taught me a lot. We've helped others before, people who couldn't afford expensive treatments. And now we want to help your daughter. Richard frowned, glancing between the boy and the old man. Help her how? What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Aaron reached into a small bag he had brought with him and pulled out a vial filled with a greenish paste. The smell was earthy, almost medicinal. This is made from herbs found in nature, he explained. It reduces swelling and improves blood flow around injured areas. Alongside specific exercises, it can awaken dormant nerves and muscles. Richard stared at the vial skeptically. To him, it looked like something you'd find in a roadside market, not a medical breakthrough. But then again, could he really judge without giving it a chance? After all, he'd tried everything else, hadn't he? And what makes you think this will work? Richard asked sharply. Doctors with decades of training and access to the latest technology haven't been able to cure Emily. Why should I believe two strangers living on the streets? The boy hesitated for a moment, then looked straight into Richard's eyes. There was no fear or arrogance in his gaze, just honesty. Because we've seen miracles happen, he said simply. Not because of us, but because of people who didn't give up. Hope isn't something money can buy, sir. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. His words struck a chord deep within Richard. For so long, he had relied on wealth and status to solve problems, only to hit one, dead end after another. Now here was this boy, a child who had probably never known comfort or security, talking about hope as though it were a tangible thing, something anyone could hold on to. Emily tugged at Richard's sleeve, breaking the silence. Daddy, can we try? She asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. Please? Richard sighed, torn between logic and emotion. Finally, he turned to the boy and Dr. Aaron. 1 week, he said firmly. If I don't see any progress after 7 days, we stop, no arguments. The boy grinned, relief washing over his face. Thank you, sir, you won't regret this. Over the next few days, Richard brought Emily to the makeshift clinic every morning. It was set up in an abandoned warehouse near the slums, its walls cracked and paint peeling, but inside, it buzzed with activity. People from the neighborhood came seeking help, some with broken limbs, others with chronic pain. Dr. Aaron moved among them, offering advice and applying the same green paste he had shown Richard. The boy assisted him, fetching supplies and comforting patients with kind words. At first, Emily was hesitant. She clung to her father's hand, unsure about being touched by strangers or lying on a thin mattress placed on the floor. But the boy, whose name, Richard learned, was Karen, quickly won her trust. He told her stories about animals and adventures, making her laugh until she forgot her nervousness. Slowly, she began to relax. Dr. Aaron started by massaging the herbal paste along Emily's spine, explaining each step carefully to Richard. This will reduce inflammation, he said. It may take time, but we must be patient. Meanwhile, Karan guided Emily through simple exercises designed to strengthen her core muscles. At first, she struggled, her arms trembling as she tried to lift herself using resistance bands. But Karan encouraged her gently, cheering her on like a proud coach. You're doing great, he said one day, when Emily managed to sit upright without support for the first time. See? Your body remembers how strong it is. Emily beamed, her cheeks flushed with pride. Even Richard couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism. Though he tried to stay guarded, he noticed tiny changes in Emily's demeanor. She seemed more energetic, more willing to push herself. One afternoon, during a session involving light stretches, her toes twitched ever so slightly. Richard froze, staring at her feet in disbelief. Did you see that? He whispered, his voice shaking. Dr. Aaron nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. It's a sign, he said. Her nerves are responding. That night, Richard sat alone in his study, replaying the moment in his mind. For 2 years, he had prayed for even the smallest sign of improvement. Now here it was, a twitch of her toes, barely noticeable yet monumental in its significance. Could it really be possible? Could these two unlikely figures, the old doctor and the street-smart boy, be the ones to bring Emily back to her feet? But as hope grew, so did challenges. Word spread about the free clinic, drawing attention not just from grateful patients, but also from troublemakers. Local gangsters, who controlled much of the area, demanded protection money in exchange for leaving the clinic alone. When Dr. Aaron refused to pay, they retaliated by vandalizing the equipment and threatening violence. One evening, as Richard drove home, his phone rang. It was Karan, his voice urgent. "Sir, they've destroyed part of the clinic," he said. "Dr. Aaron is hurt. We might have to stop." Richard clenched the steering wheel, anger bubbling inside him. He had come so far, dared to hope against all odds, and now this? No, he thought fiercely. Not now. Not when Emily was finally showing signs of progress. "We'll figure something out," Richard said firmly. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." And with that promise, Richard knew he had crossed a line. This was no longer just about curing Emily. It was about protecting the fragile thread of hope that had begun to weave itself into their lives. Whatever it took, he would ensure that Karan and Dr. Aaron could continue their work. Because sometimes, miracles needed more than faith. They needed courage, determination, and a willingness to fight for what truly mattered. In the heart of a bustling city where shiny skyscrapers stood tall like giants overlooking tiny slums below, there lived a man named Richard. He was no ordinary man. He was one of the richest people in the city, owning businesses that spanned across countries. But despite all his wealth, he carried a sadness so heavy it felt like a stone tied to his chest. His 8-year-old daughter, Emily, had been in a terrible car accident 2 years ago. The crash left her paralyzed from the waist down. No matter how many doctors they visited or how much money he spent on treatments worldwide, nothing could bring back the ability for her to walk. Every day, Richard would sit by Emily's bedside, watching her draw pictures of girls running and playing in fields, things she could no longer do herself. Her laughter still filled their home, but there was always a shadow behind her smile. She never complained, though. Instead, she dreamed of walking again even when everyone around her had almost given up hope. One evening, after another long day at work, Richard stepped out of his luxury car parked outside his penthouse building. The streets were alive with sounds, the honking of cars, chatter of pedestrians, and vendors calling out to sell snacks. As he walked toward the entrance, something caught his eye. A young boy, probably around 12 years old, sat hunched over on the curb. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face smudged with grime, and yet his eyes shone brightly against the fading light of dusk. There was something about those eyes, sharp, determined, and strangely wise for someone so young. Richard slowed down without realizing it. Normally, he wouldn't pay attention to street beggars. After all, he had enough problems of his own. But this boy seemed different. Just as Richard turned away, ready to head inside, the boy spoke up. "Sir," he called out hesitantly. Richard stopped but didn't look back immediately. People often approached him for favors or donations, and he usually brushed them off. This time, however, curiosity got the better of him. Turning slightly, he glanced over his shoulder. "What is it?" he asked, his tone clipped and impatient. The boy swallowed hard, clearly nervous. Then, taking a deep breath, he said, "I can make your daughter walk again." For a moment, Richard thought he hadn't heard right. What did this scruffy little kid just say? Was he joking? Mocking him? Or worse, trying to scam him? Anger flared within him, but before he could snap, he noticed the seriousness in the boy's expression. There was no mockery, no greed in his voice, just pure conviction. "You, what?" Richard asked, his voice quieter now, almost disbelieving. "Can help," the boy repeated firmly. "Your daughter, she can walk again. I know how." Richard froze. Those words hit him like a punch to the gut. For 2 years, he had poured every ounce of energy, every penny he owned, into finding a cure for Emily's paralysis. Top specialists, experimental therapies, cutting-edge technology. Nothing had worked. And now, here was this boy, sitting on the filthy sidewalk, claiming he held the answer. A mix of emotions swirled inside Richard. Hope, doubt, anger, desperation. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. How could this ragged child possibly achieve what the world's best doctors couldn't? Yet somewhere deep down, a flicker of hope ignited. What if, just what if? Prove it, Richard finally said, his voice low and challenging. He crossed his arms, staring down at the boy skeptically. The boy didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if expecting this reaction. Tomorrow morning, he replied calmly. Bring her to the park near the riverbank. You'll see. With that, the boy turned back to whatever he had been doing before Richard arrived, leaving. The billionaire standing there stunned. Richard shook his head, dismissing the encounter as ridiculous. It was impossible, wasn't it? Still, as he climbed the stairs to his penthouse, he couldn't shake off the boy's words. They echoed in his mind, refusing to fade away. That night, Richard tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Images of Emily flashed through his thoughts, her bright smile, her wheelchair, her sketches of running children. He replayed the conversation with the boy over and over again. Could it be real? Should he trust him? Or was it just another dead end, another false promise? By morning, Richard had made up his mind. He decided to visit the park, not because he believed the boy, but because he needed closure. If nothing else, he owed it to himself and to Emily to explore every possibility, no matter how far-fetched it seemed. Little did he know, this decision would change everything. For him, for Emily, and for countless others whose lives were about to intersect in ways none of them could have predicted.